Hello, I am back, and today I'm going to dive into Venezuela and figure out what their situation is. They're almost always paired with North Korea when right-wingers talk about failed socialist experiments. I've taken it upon myself to figure out if there's more to it than just socialism as a failed system, as there typically tends to be. Today I'm going over 3 lies propagated by the US government and right-wing propagandists, and bringing you the truth. Let's get started. The first lie I'd like to focus on is the presence of voter suppression in Venezuelan elections. Perfect timing, as there was an election in Venezuela this summer. The National Lawyers Guild Committee sent 5 observers to Venezuela this year to monitor the elections. They report not having witnessed any instances of election fraud or other such irregularities. Opposition supporters, which are US-backed, enacted violence at several polling stations across the country, and following Maduro's victory, the opposition and US mainstream media denied the legitimacy of Maduro's victory. Even Jimmy Carter has called Venezuela's electoral system the best in the world. Voters go through what is known as the electoral horseshoe, including 4 steps. They run their fingerprints through an electronic biometric ID machine before casting an electronic vote, then a paper vote, and then sign their name and stamp their fingers on paper to complete the process. After polls close, they then audit 54% of polling stations across the country at random to compare electronic votes with paper tallies. A much more intricate and secure system than what we have in the US. When I voted in 2020, all I needed to do was present my voter registration card and fill out my choice on paper before dropping it in the ballot box. Maybe, though I don't remember if I had to submit a fingerprint and/or signature. We certainly don't do audits, or if we do, it's to get rid of excessive third-party votes. There's no biometric identification or secondary record of votes, such as voting once electronically and again on paper. Then again, I guess we also don't worry about election interference, like Venezuela has to, especially with us being the ones doing the interfering. In addition to the National Lawyers Guild, 905 other observers came from 95 different countries to oversee the elections. This included members of the Carter Center, the UN, the African Union, the Latin American Council of Electoral Experts. Internal observers included the opposition parties, but at one of the polling stations visited by the National Lawyers Guild, the ruling Socialist Party did not have any observers present. Unanimous confidence was expressed by both voters and observers in the election process. Even supporters of Edmundo Gonzalez, which is who Maduro's main opponent was, acknowledged that the process was smooth and peaceful, and that polls opened exactly at 6 a.m. in accordance with national law. Voter frustrations were more over the summer heat and the wait times. The National Lawyers Guild did recommend purchasing additional voting machines, but also acknowledges that sanctions likely contribute to machine shortages. The National Lawyers Guild confirms that the Venezuelan election process functioned fairly and that Maduro's victory was legitimate. Turnout was approximately 59%, lower than our turnout this year among voting eligible persons, but was still quoted as being remarkable in the context of severe US sanctions. The report goes on to point out how the media manufactures consent by distorting polling data, quoting exit polls, and publishing articles that even opposition parties debunk on a routine basis. The report also describes US efforts to influence the election and attempts by Colombian paramilitaries to disrupt the election. A link to this will be provided in the description if you'd like to read the full report. One final comment I'd like to leave is that I think it's funny how the US media will propagate that voter suppression is widespread in Venezuela every time an election happens there, and not only is it debunked every time, but voter suppression happens here instead, specifically against left-wing parties. Every accusation is a confession. The next lie is that Venezuela is a failed experiment. I'm pretty sure that they still exist, so no. They are struggling though, but it's not because of socialism, as right-wing propagandists would like you to think. It is in fact imperialism which causes the struggle of the Venezuelan state and people. They are under sanctions from 29 different countries, including EU member states, the United Kingdom, and the United States. This comes from lack of cooperation with Western liberal powers, and perceived deterioration of human rights and democracy, and perceived corruption. Much of it is just an excuse to sanction a socialist nation for being socialist. This is the same thing countries like Cuba and North Korea deal with. They, Venezuela, are seen as an easy target owing to being geographically close to the imperial core, with weak political and economic influence and less opportunity to develop industry and agriculture than, say, China, who the West are reliant on for their massive industrial capabilities and resources. Venezuela also has the most oil in reserves, and we all know how the US is about oil. Venezuela obviously doesn't want to be exploited for it, but the US, being the US, is going to sanction and embargo them until they get their way, or eventually just invade them. Speaking of invasions, the US has been trying to coup the socialist Venezuelan government since 2002, about halfway into Hugo Chavez's first term as president. They also, by their own admission, tried to prop Juan Guaido up in an attempt to usurp the presidency from Maduro in 2019, allowing him to take the role of interim president until 2023 when he was exiled. Venezuela has not failed, but they are struggling, and they are struggling not because they are a socialist nation or are run by socialists, but because of imperialism and the fact that the US and their vassals see Venezuela as an easy target, having put them under a stranglehold from the beginning of their transition to socialism to prevent them from being able to make it work. The final lie we'll be looking at is that Venezuela is even socialist to begin with. Yes, you heard me right. Venezuela is a reformist state. They just so happen to have a large presence of socialists in government, including in its executive branch. There is a difference between having a socialist ruling party and being a socialist country, believe it or not. Venezuela has a much larger public sector than that of the US, but it's nowhere as big as China's public sector. Private property is still a right in Venezuela, whereas any fully socialist country has already abolished it, as it is a core value of Marxism. Venezuela can be best described as social democratic, though one could be forgiven for calling it democratic socialist, and yes, there is a difference. Calling it full-on Marxism, though, is bad faith acting. Yes, there is a large socialist presence in the government, but economically they have yet to transition from a capitalist mode of production. Whether this is due to the potentiality of conflict with the United States or pro-capitalist upheaval within the country is unknown. Perhaps a slow transition is best for Venezuela in this case. What is for certain, though, is that supporting Venezuela is critical for being led by socialists, operating outside of the US sphere of influence, and being a hamper on US imperialist interests. It is crucial to adopt an anti-war stance when it comes to Venezuela, and really any country. Any US invasion, commonly referred to by the government as an intervention, is purely for imperialism. Resources, money, political influence, exploitation, control. Our government does not do wars to spread democracy or overthrow brutal dictators, or because it's right, whatever the fuck that means. If it's not about conquest, it's about vassalization, but it's always about imperialism. I've left links to my sources in the description. One final message to new viewers: please stop letting the government think for you, stop letting politicians think for you, stop letting right-wing grifters and propagandists think for you, form your own opinion. If you reject statistics and facts because they're left-leaning, are you really a free thinker? Open your mind. That's literally all it costs to view the sources, is a willingness to learn and adopt a new perspective. And I'm telling you now, the people in power want you to hate socialism. They want you to obey them, and to do so, they fabricate and exaggerate atrocities to make socialism look bad. They want the working class to remain divided, and in order to do so, they made two parties that are exactly the same but talk differently, and run them by the working class every 4 years. They run the narratives that hard work is rewarded and that the richest people worked hard to get to where they're at, and in doing this, they create a culture of overwork, where people subject themselves to back-breaking effort instead of doing the bare minimum of their job requirements. And sure, exceeding expectations can be rewarding mentally and give you a sense of accomplishment at the end of the day, but you're still being paid the same, and if you do the bare minimum, they chide you for being lazy. Capitalists want to exploit you and get you to do more work for the same amount of pay, and make empty promises to motivate you. If you've ever been promised a promotion only for your boss to hire one of their friends, you know what I mean. Abandon liberalism, abandon conservatism, and embrace socialism and class solidarity. Comrades, I hope you were able to learn from this video and debate the topic of Venezuela better. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to click thumbs up, share the video with your friends, family, and coworkers, leave a comment debunking any additional lies or adding context to some of my points, and please subscribe for more content like this, as there will be more. And click the bell to get notified when I upload. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video. Bye, guys.